of a great engineering conquest of Africa. Threading its way through Central Africa is the mighty Zambezi. The idea of damming the Zambezi, first mooted about 40 years ago, is now becoming an actuality at Kariba. Soon, at this isolated place, a great dam will supply electricity for the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. The Kariba Dam will push back the waters of the Zambezi to form the world's largest man-made lake. Some 50 miles wide, it will stretch 200 miles upstream to within 40 miles of Livingston. At Livingston are the world-famous Victoria Falls, probably until now the only well-known feature of the Zambezi. It's a raging torrent during the summer flow, which is up to 80 times greater than the low flow in November, when it looks like this. Roughly 1,700 miles long, the Zambezi below the falls flows through wild country, the home of wild animals, and the home of the dreaded tsetse fly. Large tracts of this untamed country remain unfit for human habitation. Unfit for the white man, at any rate. This indeed is the forbidding Africa, which gave it the name of the Dark Continent.
You wouldn't be able to say white man today.
Before this becomes part of the vast Kariba Lake, over 80,000 Africans will have to be moved from their primitive homes to more fertile land. Some 240 miles below the falls, the Zambezi squeezes its majestic way through the rock-bound Kariba Gorge. This is wild, inaccessible bush country, visited by few white men, until the Kariba hydroelectric scheme was seriously considered. But this forbidding spot was chosen for modern man's greatest development project. From its earliest stages, the building of this ambitious hydroelectric scheme posed a tremendous ancillary problem, namely, the housing of the 2,000 Europeans and 8,000 Africans engaged in its construction. In the face of world competition, Richard Costain Limited of Great Britain submitted their proposal for a vast housing scheme, and their tender was accepted by the Federal Power Board. The secret of their success depended on pre-planning and a determination to overcome difficulties in virtually uncharted territory. When the tender was accepted, surveyors fought their way into this roadless area to lay the foundations of a large and difficult project. As yet, onlookers were unmoved by the miracles to be wrought at Kariba. Within 48 hours of the contract award, the equipment began to move in, virtually fighting its way in foot by foot. But little by little tracks were made, opening the way to the working area. Bush was cleared and the wild game left of its own accord. But the first roads followed elephant tracks to the river, and so the spearhead enabled more and more equipment to be brought in. Altogether, £250,000 worth of equipment necessary for the completion of the £4 million township project. Labour was recruited from Nyasaland. The pioneers of this scheme suffered the tortures of heat and discomfort, meeting Africa at its very worst. Struggling up steep hillsides in temperatures of 120 degrees, they worked on, laying power lines for the temporary electric supply they brought with them, and facing the stifling task of winching heavy equipment up the slopes inch by inch. The whole project had to start from scratch, a pretty big scratch. Even sand had to be sought, the first raw material. Good supplies took some finding, but there's no shortage, in spite of the fantastic quantities required for the housing scheme, and indeed for the dam works themselves. Most of the sand is obtained from rivers entering the Zambezi just above Kariba. The first use of the sand was for the making of sand cement blocks in portable machines. Originally, as you see, this work was done out in the open. Owing to the intense heat, most of this sand cement block making was done at night, and keeping them moist during the curing period required 9,000 gallons of water an hour, 24 hours a day. The blocks were made, matured, and stockpiled by the million. Within a few months, the production of sand cement blocks was stepped up and provided Kariba with its first factory, a sizable unit, as you can see from these aerial shots. The next important raw material was stone, which was quarried high up in the hills, permitting gravity to do most of the conveying. The stone was tipped to a crushing and screening plant, being broken down to sizes suitable for whatever concrete conglomerate was specified for numerous jobs. Thanks to careful planning, hillside chutes delivered the crushed stone to the lorries. Sand is plentiful on the river banks, but when tropical rains bring the rivers down in flood, such sources are cut off. For this reason, the river sandbanks were worked continuously, and what couldn't be used immediately was stockpiled into enormous dumps above flood level to provide an uninterrupted supply. Water, of course, was drawn from the Zambezi itself. The pumps mounted on a ramp to be adjusted to the river's fluctuations. But higher up, water purification works were built to provide pure water for construction as well as drinking. At the highest point, a reservoir was constructed for the township. Another essential project of high priority was the building of a temporary power station. This in itself was a major undertaking of the utmost urgency. But before the system of power lines was completely erected, the diesel-operated power station was supplying current. So much had to be built at once. So much was essential. The control tower at the airstrip was completed in 10 days and nights, and was ready in time for the arrival of the first Italian tradesmen, flown from Italy to step up Costain's building program. Sufficient local labor could not be called in without upsetting the Federation's labor balance. With the arrival of the Italians, the tempo of work was increased. Foundations were poured in scores of places. Raw Africans from the Asa land were showing the results of training in increased proficiency. The whole project of building the Kariba Heights Township was slipping into top gear. Cheap to produce, ideal for speedy erection and for climatic conditions, loads of sand cement blocks flowed steadily to all parts of the area. Amid an orderly chaos, a well-planned township was rising from the primeval African bush country. With centuries of building in their traditions, Italian tradesmen were working side by side with African laborers with no such antecedents. The results were magnificent. The double-story blocks for bachelors were taking shape. At the same time, houses were being built as fast as roads were constructed and essential services such as drainage could be laid down. And quite apart from meeting the demands for individual housing, communal requirements were well on their way, such as a school. The entire contract called for completion in 2 years, but careful planning, organization, drive, and close cooperation with the consulting engineers were already reducing this period. Made specially to fit transport, cupboards and other joinery items were trucked in over 200 miles from Salisbury, the nearest accessible town. From Salisbury, too, came the immense quantity of asbestos roofing, the material chosen as most suitable for the whole project. To assist the corrugated asbestos to keep out the intense heat, aluminium foil sheeting is laid underneath it. For tradesman and labourer, the working day lasted from dawn until dusk, a long stint by any standards. But the coming of evening frequently meant many more hours of work for those directing operations. At conferences lasting well into the night, they thrashed out problems and cleared the way for the next day's operation. But this hard work had a social side and a camaraderie which offered a welcome respite. The hub of all this activity was the house of Costain's agent, known locally as the Taj Michel. It was the first place to give an indication of how pleasant things can be at Kariba, and it overlooks what will one day be part of the lake. In Kariba Heights itself, and in the network of roads lacing the hillside, there was much to show for the unremitting efforts expended over the past few months. It was a constant state of change, and there was always something new to be seen during the routine visits by senior officials of the consulting engineers and contractors. To everyone concerned, Kariba was a challenge, demanding nothing short of the utmost effort. Down on the sweltering dam site, the suspension bridge spanned the gorge, and the road bridge was moving towards completion. The river was low, and for the time being, placid. The plans for Phase 1 were being put into operation. The first huge diversion tunnel was being hewed out of the solid rock. At about this time, Costain undertook certain contracts for infra-seas, among them the earthworks for the switching station high above the dam site. These contracts called for major additions to the township plant, which had for the most part completed its work. The tonnage of rock and earth moved reached astronomical figures. It explains why the whole Kariba scheme simply wasn't feasible until modern methods and machines were introduced. Whatever plans may have been considered 40 years ago, they must inevitably have been doomed to failure. Tons at a time, hour after hour, that's how it went. The heat and dust were hell on the men, and equally they were hell on the machines. Wonders were performed on field maintenance before full repair facilities could be provided. The men who kept that equipment operating performed yeoman service, but keep it going they did. As months passed, the dam builders were making spectacular progress. The semicircular copper dam curved out from the north bank, allowing some of the main dam wall foundations to be built inside it, while the crocodile and bilharzia-infested river was kept out. High above the dam, heavy equipment was working at full pressure. Schedules were being met, obstacles and difficulties overcome. Where ground was too hard for excavation, the wagon drills were brought up and bored holes for blasting. The use of explosives was always a matter of precise calculation, enough to do the job without causing damage or risk to personnel working close by. There were too many men in the gorge to take chances. With the charges in place and ready for firing, every blast was carefully timed, right down to the second. Really meant something, for the ground was safely blasted directly over the Blondin platform, the nerve center of the entire dam building operation. Carelessness might even have brought work to a standstill. Perched on a hillside, The Blondin platform has a buttressed foundation to withstand the strain exerted on it. Excavations for this were hewn by Costain, and like the miles of road within the township, giving access from one part of the site to another, it has permitted swifter progress to be made on the dam itself. From the air, one appreciates the skill that went into building roads in such steep and rugged terrain. Quite apart from these working roads, beautiful macadamized highways give access to the Kariba Dam from the south. For years, this road will bring tourists to see one of the coming wonders of the world. One of the remarkable feats was the slicing off of an entire hilltop, which was ripped out and leveled as the site of the Kariba Hospital. From plan to patient, the clearing of land and the building of the hospital took 6 months, an extremely fast time for a specialized building in a wild, isolated area. Here again, it was teamwork which tackled a major problem and brought it to a successful conclusion. The need for this fully staffed, fully equipped 90-bed hospital is obvious. For no engineering project as big as Kariba can ever be built without the incidence of illness and accident. Previously, accident cases were flown out to Salisbury, but full facilities on the spot have already saved numerous lives. The hospital, together with the nurses' quarters, are among what one might call the civic project. Other such buildings include a magistrate's court and a police station for the enforcement of law. Kariba's 8,000 African workers are housed in the African village. In many ways, it is a marked improvement on the homes these workers had come from. In fact, most of them arrived half-starved. There are quarters for single men and for married men. Africans are accustomed to doing their cooking out in the open air, and there's no longer any sign of the malnutrition which was previously so prevalent. The African village has its own facilities, a post office, its own school for the education of African children, and a more than adequate welfare building. In fact, by African standards, there is little that is lacking in that village. The difficult matter of relationships between white and black were magnificently handled by Tom Sowley, who encouraged them to make the most of their opportunities for enjoyment. Of course, the African has a dance for every occasion. Today at Kariba Heights, all the work in the original contract is completed. Although intended as a temporary housing scheme, much of it will remain permanently. The most recent contract is for a modern hotel, for this will certainly become a popular tourist and holiday resort. There is a kids' pool and a beautifully tiled full-size swimming bath. Crocodiles and bilharzia make the river unfit for swimming. There are numerous blocks of bachelor apartments, which may be used for visitors at a later date. Other buildings erected at Kariba include a fire station, and put up in a record-breaking 10 days are several bank buildings for the convenience of local inhabitants. Then there is the post office, which handles their mail, and a communal hall for religious services and entertainment. And equally important for the life of Kariba is the school. At present, most of the children are Italian, receiving their first grounding in English. VIPs visiting the project are usually put up at the guest house. This consists of a number of separate suites and a spacious lounge. a far cry from the tents and prefabs they had to endure in the early days. The offices of the consultants, Messrs. Gibbs, Coyne and Soge, are sited to enable them to look straight down onto the giant dam below. Dramatic wonders have already been wrought here in Central Africa. A township has been planned and built, every handing over of keys bringing it nearer completion. The highest handover achieved in any one month, and incidentally the hottest month of the year, involved the incredible amount of £294,000. The whole contract was met in 16 months, 8 months ahead of schedule. This outstanding achievement has enabled numerous families to bring the homely look to Kariba. Colorful gardens add splashes of color to a district previously drab and dusty. Hardship has been replaced by gracious living. Today, visitors who fly up from Salisbury can appreciate the full impact of the Costain contribution. For out of this forbidding bush country, untouched since the dawn of time, a complete modern township has risen in the short span of less than a year and a half. This is Africa tamed, transformed and civilized. The building of Kariba Heights has written a new chapter in Africa's history. In providing houses and amenities for 10,000 Europeans and Africans engaged in the mighty task of harnessing the Zambezi, the firm of Richard Costain, 8 months ahead of schedule, has given a vital and unparalleled service and has ensured that the Kariba hydroelectric scheme can be finished by 1960, the greatest and most imaginative engineering feat ever undertaken by man.